Recently I had to transport some musical equipment to a musical festival. As part of this, I needed to use a large van and a large trailer. After loading up the van, making our way safely to the festival, unloading at the venue, then came the challenge of trying to find a park for said van and trailer. Now, it was very fortunate that I had lined up a park that I thought was the best one, allowing the easiest escape at the end of the day. As I approached the park, the car that was in it actually moved away, and I went, this again is good fortune. I then proceeded to turn into the park as best I could. Now, the trailer didn't quite line up properly, which is pretty usual for a trailer. So I made my way forward, made the adjustments for the steering to bring the trailer back in line. Again, still wasn't as straight as I'd like, so I moved forward, again, made the small adjustments, made my way back, and re-evaluated. Each time I was getting closer, however, it was clear that it wasn't quite as lined up with the park as I would like to be. After moving forwards and backwards a number of times, I was very fortunate again that someone came along that I knew who was able to offer the fact that actually I wasn't going to be able to get the trailer to fit into the park due to it being larger than the park itself. This then made sense. I had a new perspective on what it is that I was trying to do, and actually required just putting one of the wheels of the trailer up onto the curb next to the grass, which would mean that I would then not be hanging over into the car park next to me. With this, I had this person watching and being able to guide how far backwards and forwards I could move, and then finally had the van and trailer lined up in the way that I would like. This was an interesting process, and it's one that links very closely to the OAR approach, which I'm here to talk to you about today. The ability to work through a cycle of understanding the options in terms of what I'm trying to do or the outcome of getting this trailer parked, the actions that I needed to take, so the corresponding steering and how much steering was required with this, and finally the reflection of how had I progressed the goal, becomes a key component of how we can use this cycle in both a practical context, but also when there is a really particular outcome that we're working towards. The OAR approach is a practical tool. This promotes a clear process that ensures that we're able to progress a particular project, activity, or outcome. This cycle is a repeatable one, and one that we can either use in a small format or one that we can use in a larger format. The key aspect of this is to use it in a way that allows you to progress. As you progress, you'll be able to repeat this cycle, reflecting, consolidating, to better inform yourself through the options, actions, and reflect. The first step of the cycle is to consider options. Options can be broken down into a couple of different ways, and each is applicable in different situations, so needs consideration. The first place we're going to start is our current knowledge and skills. This is always a good starting place, simply because it's what we bring to whatever activity or task that we're looking to progress. Inside of this, we can actually then consider what options come from what we know already. The second part might then look at something in terms of independent research and exploration. And this really comes from identifying that maybe we don't have all of the knowledge, or that we suspect there is more that would be relevant to help us proceed with this. From here, we might seek external guidance. This allows us to consult with someone who has more experience or might have relevant information that is going to be useful in informing ourselves through this option process. And finally, we will consider imagination. Imagination is also an important part of this, that allows us to consider other ways or other skills, or even the way that we might use things from a different process and how this could apply into this particular situation. The ability to consider what isn't is also an important part to inform ourselves as to what options are going to be useful for us. This now brings us to actions, which is arguably the most important part of the cycle. Without actions, we are unable to progress the cycle, therefore unable to progress the outcome or achievement that we are looking to attain. The first step that we need to take is decision making. Decision making is taking our options, working out what our preference is, and from that preference, putting something into action through making a commitment. That commitment is the action part of this. If we have a look at value attachment, this is where we see ourselves investing into the process. That investment might be through resources or time. And with this, we want to make sure that we're clear that we have moved from thinking about the options to actioning the options. The value attachment also adds an element of risk, and that risk can be a good thing because it does highlight to us that we have made that step into action. If we've made that step, or we're in the process of making that step and realizing that actually the action we're looking to take is bigger than we expected, we can now consider the minimum viable action that we can do to progress the cycle. In some ways, this can interact in the action part, or it can simply be that we move the cycle in a way that is going to allow us to keep taking small steps towards that outcome. Finally, a consideration of execution and adaptability. Execution, again, is putting things into action. Adaptability is recognizing that once we've started that process, that if things change, we're able to adapt to them. And this should be in the easy manner that we don't need to restart the cycle. An example of this would be being at a checkout, waiting in line, a new checkout opens up, there is less resistance, we can go through and are able to complete that action in a way that is useful to us. This brings us to reflect. Our starting point for reflect is a comparison of intent. This is essentially matching up what is it that we intended to do through our action and where did we end up. Have we been able to progress the action in the way that we anticipated, or have we found that actually we've come to a different outcome from this particular action? And again, it is very much centered around that action in relation to the options. From here, we might do a self-evaluation of the process. How do we feel about this? How does this match our experience? How does it work within what we know, going back to our current skills and knowledge, and have we been able to progress this in some way? From here, it would then be useful to seek external acknowledgement, in particular thinking about how a different perspective may allow us to see the progress that we've made, or potentially ways that are going to help to inform the next part of the cycle. With this external acknowledgement, it might not be practical for us to use it all of the time, but depending on how many times we've been through the cycle or how large the action was that we've taken, then it would be useful to have that perspective, again, as part of that learning process and being able to inform ourselves as to what those next options, or even if we have actually reached our final destination with what it is that we've looked to do. Finally, we come to consolidate. And consolidate is really where we think about the learning that has taken place. Again, because this is a cycle that's designed to be repeated, that consolidation can be quite small. It can simply be, this worked well, in consideration of the particular situation. The consolidation might be, this is a useful application or a useful action, it just didn't quite work in this particular scenario. With each of these things, the reflection process allows us to round off the cycle, and then we can move back to our first step of considering the next options. Keeping the OAR approach as a visible model for progressing your understanding and learning is a great way of being able to work through situations where there is an element of uncertainty there for you. Sometimes it's that knowing maybe what you should be doing versus knowing what is required to do that. Therefore, the actions that you take become the key component of this. What we want to overcome is where we are stuck essentially in the options mode. We've got reflections happening, but there is no action or progression of the cycle. Without the action part, we're going to find that we essentially are then going to procrastinate or put off making that decision that we need to progress the cycle. You can use this in many ways, and one of the considerations is your autonomy as a learner. Autonomy doesn't mean that we do everything ourselves. However, what it does mean is that we're taking control of that process of learning. If you think that from every action you take that there is an element of learning, you will then see why learning is at the core of everything you do, through the application, through the knowledge that you build, and ultimately what it allows you to do to progress the things that you want to do in the future.